So, hi, Carlos.
Hello.
Carlos is going to show us a demo, no slides, demo troubleshooting API issues within minutes using API Observability. Carlos, I'll let you introduce yourself. If you have any comments, any questions, put it in the chat. I'm going to monitor them and we'll ask them to Carlos at the end of his session. Enjoy, Carlos, the stage is yours.
Hey, Amber, nice seeing you. So yes, I'm Carlos. I'm a solution architect here at Tyke. I'm actually very excited to do this because my first time presenting in a live event. So yeah, I'm actually excited that I was invited. Well, what I'm going to be talking about today, basically troubleshooting APIs. If you've been using APIs, actually, if you're not even using APIs, but when you access to a website, you're actually using APIs, right? Those websites are actually calling to different services. So now there is a lot of different things that can happen when you're trying to access to an API. There could be errors, there could be delays, there could be something that you don't expect, like an error, a delay, right? So I wanted to ask you and think about what kind of errors you're having lately when you're trying to access to a website. For example, myself, I tried to access to a credit card company and I tried to change my bank account and it was not possible, right? I keep having 404s and that is a very big pain for me as a user. Now, in this, let's say in this experience, there's two actors. One is the final user. It could be you. Think when you try to access to a website, or it could be those heroes that are the engineers or even the troubleshooters that try to fix anything that can happen in the backend, right? And try to think on how the different services connect to each other and try to think around the different bottlenecks that you can face. So actually, there's a solution for that, right? What is called observability. I'm not giving anything here, right? We were talking all the time about observability. So the solution here is actually observability. For me, observability is making people happy. Observability is having enough data in order to take the right decisions and meaningful decisions in order to be able to fix whatever is broken, but also to be happy seeing how things are working, right? And I'm going to show you now how the solution would look like. I always like starting from the end when I do a demonstration. So don't worry, you'll see a little bit more than this, but this is what made me happy. What you see here is a story of the request, right? Of course, this is called technically traces. For me, it's a story. It tells me when I make a request, what is happening with that request. I start with my website, right? I'm accessing to a website. Then there's a front-end proxy, which he's serving and requesting all this different information to, for example, a gateway, which I'll be explaining what a gateway is later. And then you can see more services. For example, the shipping service. You can see that there can be errors. And every time you see like a red thing here, it means that there's an error. So if I will click on an error, now I have detailed information on where the error is happening and what exactly is happening. Here, I can see that the authorization field is missing, and that's why I have no access to data. And of course, if you keep looking at the data here, you can see how long it took, for example, to do some of these requests. Now, this is the solution. But of course, what I wanted to show you is something more hands-on. And for that, I'm going to be using the only slide that I have, which is this one. This is a diagram that explains how the demo is going to go and how the demo looks like. The first thing that you see in the left side is the API consumer. Think that is you, somebody that wants to access some data. Of course, the API consumer is going to use an application, right? What's called a client application. Think of the client application that it could be just the postman to make a single request, or it could be a website where you don't see what is happening in the backend, but you're actually making a lot of requests to those different API services. And the cool thing about this is that when you have an API service, it could be that API service calling to another API service, and you don't even know, which is good and bad though. Because if, for example, the errors happen here, you need to understand that it was happening here, not here, in order to fix it. Now, this is where things get interesting. There is one component called the API gateway. The API gateway is going to allow you to understand what is happening in those requests. Why? Because it's the actor that is going to be compiling and taking all this information, and also is going to be telling you if you can access to some resources, and it's going to set the rules on how you can access to those resources. It's going to tell you, you can access here this many times, for example, with a quota or a rate limit. And then with different features, you can send that information to the correct tools. For the different developers, actually, solution, site relativity, or SREs, or for example, platform engineers, or for example, any troubleshooter in order to fix possible issues. The tag gateway, in this case, is OpenTelemetry enabled. We've been talking about the open standard. And with that, you can send all that data to different OpenTelemetry tools, compatible OpenTelemetry tools, as it could be Jagger. Or you can do something a little bit less complex, I will say, and is using, not less complex, but more up-to-date right now, which is using webhooks in order to send data to a message system in order to do real-time troubleshooting. So I hope this is understood. And without further ado, I'm going to start with the demo. What is the first thing that you see here? Well, right now, you see a client application that you can use in order to access data. Me as Carlos, developer, I want access to some information. And of course, right now, even if you don't feel it, I'm pretty nervous and I want some information to make me happy. So I'm actually going to be making a request to a happy service, which is actually telling me that I'm doing an amazing job, that I'm absolutely fantastic, that I'm rocking it, which is good. But now things get a little bit complex when I try to access to some of the information. It could be, for example, that I want to get some information about my headers, so I can see them here, or that I want to see what is my IP, I get my IP, or some XML information. Now, what happens if I click one more time? Let's check. Well, it tells me that, how many, wait 1 second. I don't know what is my quota right now. There you go, quota exceeded. So it was 4 times. I had 3 before, now it's 4 times. So it means that now I cannot access anymore. The cool thing about this is that there's somebody in the backend checking all this type of errors and being able to solve them in real time. So now, if I put my hat of troubleshooter and I move to my message system, I can see how right now, which is 7:27 p.m. where I am in Spain, there was an attempt to access to one of the APIs, but the user did not have enough quota. So it's telling me that there is an error and that I need to reset that quota. So there are different tools that you can use in order to do that. And one of them is, for example, a dashboard. I don't want you to get into details here. I just want you to understand that there's tools that people have in order to make these decisions. But in order to make those decisions, they need to have data, they need to have information. So I'm just going to update that. And I'm going to go back to my application and I'm going to check if this is correct. And I can keep doing requests. Yeah, this is good. So it works, right? Me, as a developer, I'm able to access because the troubleshooter fixed this issue. Now, in order to make, let's say, information was useful when we get into the traces, I'm going to be doing a delay of 2 seconds, for example, and then a delay of 3 seconds. And why is that? Well, I don't know if you went to the other talk about 200 is not okay, always. And this is because even though right now I have a 200 okay, I'm not okay with a 3 seconds delay. Me as a developer, things to go fast. We live in that world where we want everything to be snap, right? Everything needs to happen out of the bat, right now. I'm actually going to be stopping now the service. So you actually see that even if I try to access now, for example, to the ones that we did before, now there was an error proxying the request, and I want to see that information as well in the traces. There's another error. So let's stop with the part of immediate real-time troubleshooting, and let's do some more digging into the history of the different requests that I made. So now I'm going to go to an observability tool, which is Jagger. I'm pretty sure you've seen this before. And I'm going to click on find all my traces. And here you can see, 1 second, all my traces means all my traces. There you go. So in here, you can see the story of the different requests that happened while I was doing those type of access, right? I did an API request, I did a GET, I did some XML requests. Actually, this XML request tells me that it's exactly when I got the error about the quota. And here, I can actually see that information, quota exceeded. So in the future, I could filter and understand how many users are having quota exceeded. Is it something happening often? Do we need to give different plans? Well, that's something that could be useful. Now, if I go back here, I can see, for example, the last error, which was that the service was stopped, right? This service was not working, and there was a connection refused. So besides of checking something in the gateway, I'm going to go directly to the service and restart it in order to fix the issue. And last but not least, there is something that is mattering to me, and is that if my users try to access to an API, and I see that it's taking more than 2 or 3 seconds, then I need to fix that. And I need to understand where is that delay taking so much time. And right now I can see the gateway is telling me that that happens in the service level. So all this was, let's say, the easy part. All this was the not so complex. If I want to go to something more complex, I know that before I show you that there were different services. In here, there's only one service that I'm monitoring, and then the Jagger, but there's no connection between the different services, and that's something that I want to see. So now I want you to cross your fingers and wish me luck, because I'm going to be changing environments, and I'm going to stop one environment that I have, and I'm going to enable, or I'm going to start one of the demos that Juliana was playing in before, and is the hotel demo, but with Pike included. So now I'm starting that service. I'm going to cross my fingers, and I hope that everything will correctly. I was having some hiccups before with the system, but now it looks good. So the first thing that I'm going to see, and I want you to think, is I am going to be getting into a localhost 80, which is actually a website. It's a front end that allows me to see different products. So right now I'm seeing different products. If I click in one of the products, I'm going to get to some information, right? To some quantities that I can add. For example, if I go to another product, I can see more information. I can actually not add to the cart, and this is intended. So I didn't want the demo to work properly because I want to see some information, right? Let me actually refresh. But I wanted to see some errors in the backend, right? Right now, you can see that the website is a little bit broken. So let's see what is happening actually with this demo. If I go to Jagger and I click on Find Traces, actually, the demo is broken. Give me 1 second. And it's going to take no time. So I'm going to select items, start, and this should be working. This is what happens when you try things 15 times, and there you go. Good. Now it's working. You try things 15 times, but sometimes, yeah, oh, it doesn't work like expected. So now I can see that I can add one of the telescope to the cart, sorry, and I can do different things like go to shipping cart. Actually, this button was not working before, so I wanted something that to check in the Jagger. And for example, I can empty my cart, and many of the things that you can do in a website, right? So if I go to my Jagger in here, and the first thing that I can show you is, well, let me refresh now that I was doing before. And I can show you that there are now way many services than before, right? We have the cart service, checkout service, and all this is being interconnected. So if I click in, and I'm going to put more traces. If I click on Find Traces, now, what am I seeing? I'm seeing that all this is interconnected. I'm seeing a lot of green dots here, which means happy customers, but I'm also seeing a lot of red dots, which means not so happy customers. So if I keep going down, let's find one trace that has more, let's say, services connected. So if I click in this one, I can see that this one has 39 spans and 6 errors, which means there's a lot of work to do. Right now, the tag gateway is receiving errors, the checkout service is receiving errors, and the front end is having errors. So that's something that I need to fix. So if I go and click here, the cool thing about this is that you see the entire story. You see the front end, you see the gateway. So the front end was making some requests to the gateway. You can see that. And then, for example, you see how the checkout service started to have errors. What kind of error? Well, there's some issues in converting prices from one place or from one, let's say, currency to another. And then if I keep going down, I can see how this checkout service, now what it's doing is connecting via the gateway to a cut service. So this is what I was mentioning before. You're going from the front end to the gateway, and then the services are connecting to each other and making requests to each other. So how hard it could be to find an error if you don't have this data. Now, something that I found recently, apart from all this cool information, is that Jagger, for example, tells you and paints you an architecture. So for example, here, I can see, and this is very cool, how the front end will connect to proxies and some other stuff, and then all the way to the gateway. Of course, this needs a little bit more cleaning. The names were too long, but as you can see, it paints you a good picture of what is happening, even the load generator. Of course, I didn't make so many clicks in order to create all those traces, but the load generator is creating that for me, right? So this is very powerful. It tells me not only, let's say, what is happening, but also how the flows are going. And we see this with prospects that they don't know what's happening in their systems. And it tells me as well that some people that are giving, let's say, products to a lot of users also do not have this kind of stuff. And for example, that a huge retailer or a credit card company as the one that I have, that I need to call them because they have an error in their API makes, well, users not happy. So in order to recap, I'm going to stop sharing. What you saw was a way of observing what is happening in the systems, a way of making people happy. So if there's no errors, there's people happy. And of course, you gave the tools to the different troubleshooters in order to make things go correctly and smooth, right? So I really hope you liked the demo. And if you want to know anything around how it was implemented and that kind of stuff, let me know. I'm more than happy to answer questions. And questions.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Carlos. So if you have any questions to Carlos, let us know. I have some, of course, as always. So first, we had somebody that asked us, I think it was only to the host and panelists, that asked about API. So in the first demo, you had only the API gateway that was instrumented, sending traces, and not the API service. And in the second one, you have all the components, including the gateway that was sending the traces. Do you see that with users a lot? Where do you see API teams going? Are they already, do they have everything instrumented, or do they struggle and the gateway may be a first step for them to get started with observability?
That's a very good question. So that actually is a question that a prospect asked me. They were asking me, do I need to have OpenTelemetry in all my service in order to get OpenTelemetry up and running? And do I need to change the code and logic from, for example, a legacy system? And I told them no, right? An API gateway right now, like the one from Tyke, but there's other ones that have that tracing enabled, right? That OpenTelemetry already enabled. And you can actually use it in order to send data to whichever tool of your choice. So let's say that you don't need to have all your services with the code already implemented or OpenTelemetry enabled in order to do that. You can start from basically right now. If you saw in my first scenario, basically all the errors were logged by the gateway. Even there, I was able to figure out what was happening, for example, in the host, right? So yeah, and why didn't I have tracing there? I tried to find some services with tracing enabled. I was not able to find them. And then I tried to make it myself, but my laptop doesn't like very well NPM how I have configured. So I just keep having errors in compiling. I was like, oh, you know what?
Is it an M1?
Whatever. It is an M1. It is an M1.
Yeah.
It's just every time. So yeah.
So we have a question from David. Seeing the derived observer architecture diagram is nice. One nice feature of meta observability would be to identify when the architecture has changed, perhaps unexpected. Any thoughts about such meta observability?
Oh, that would be amazing. Yeah, that's very cool. I mean, so what happens sometimes is that people don't even know what is happening in their environment. And it could be that some change was made and it was not documented. And then you just figure out that something was changed, right? A breaking change that you don't know. And if you can actually see it in the nice system diagram, that's amazing. So what better to see it that with a real life scenario, right? You start requesting some, let's say you start doing some requests, and then if those services are pictured somehow, then you're going to figure out if there was a change that was not documented. I really like that idea, David. Very cool.
Yeah, it would be great, like being able to export it like in a JSON format and then to do a diff from one day into another. Yeah.
Yes.
There is a function in Jaeger where you can make a diff from two traces. So if you have a trace that has an error and one that doesn't have an error, it kind of shows you what are the difference, and then that can help you to understand where the error comes from. But doing it at an architectural level, that would be something really cool. Yeah.
Well,
oh, more question coming in. Okay, from Bill. You showed errors in the context of tracing, but tracing is often something which is sampled less than 100%. Do you recommend tracing be enabled for all the calls?
Oh, so what? Yeah, that's a very good question, and we actually sometimes mention that if something is in production and is working well, sometimes do not have tracing. So I wouldn't recommend to have tracing in all the calls, because at the end it could be expensive, right? In terms of data, hosting. So I'll say, and I don't wanna let's say tell you what you need to do. I will say is a little bit of understanding how your environment is working. If you need to have it, for example, in pre-prod, that'll be a good way of understanding how things are working. And then when you have it in production, maybe you can have some tracing for some services that you feel like they're going to be more critical, and that's it. But we, for example, do not recommend to have in production everything, all the traces enabled.
Yeah, there's also one thing that could be explored is error-based tracing, where you only report the errors, but otherwise 10%. Mm-hmm. Or one thing that you could look at is get metrics to really have like using metrics to understand the errors, and then have some error traces that are captured. And if you have lots of errors, chances are that you have a lot of similar errors, so you have a lot of similar traces that would give you the information. But it's always a play to see a balance. If you want to have 100%, you might need more CPU, or you might need more RAM to have the same experience, same timing. Yeah. Next question. Great demo. Yeah, I agree, Carlos. Great demo. Really cool. How would it work with API endpoints that are not fronted by an API gateway?
Oh, well, actually, there's an example. If you saw Juliano actually show it without a gateway. Now, the thing is, if you don't have a gateway, some of the logic that I was using, as for example, rate limiting or quotas or authorization, is something that you should implement in the logic of the services. Now, the issue with that, and I'm not being biased because I am from Tyke and I have a gateway, the issue is that you're going to have to implement in every single service the logic of access and the logic of rate limiting and quotas. And it could be that, for example, if you have 100 services or 200 services, which we have users that have 200 lambdas, they need to implement logic in all of them. And that is a button, because depending on who deploys or who develops those type of, let's say, backends, then it could be that they're not following the standards. Hopefully, yes. But for example, if you have a legacy one and then you have a new one and you have to make changes. So long story short, it depends on your use case, but we normally see people starting to use more and more gateways in order to front those services.
And what could be interesting is also if you remember that architecture diagram that we all really liked, if you have your services that are instrumented and the gateway that produce something, you'll be able also to catch those calls that are not passing through the gateway. So kind of also being able to have an additional security check to make sure you have everything centralized if you do decide to use an API gateway. Perfect. Thank you. So, Carlos, when you talk to user and work with user and customers, what are the main pain points in troubleshooting APIs?
Okay, so normally when a user wants to troubleshoot the APIs, they want to get the data out of Tyke normally. So that's something they want to do. And this because they want to use external tools in order to somehow analyze that data. And normally they want to implement it or correlate it with other services they have, right? Which, for example, that's why OpenTelemetry is very useful. Now, the biggest pains are needing to extract the data and pushing it to a third-party application. And that's why they always ask us, do you have a way of doing that? And then the other question is, how would you do it? And if you enable OpenTelemetry. I don't know why, and this is, I think, is Sonia's fault. All of our prospects now are asking, hey, do you have OpenTelemetry? And I think it's all because of all the information that Sonia is pushing out. But biggest pain is that, and one that we had, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch, actually in the cloud, Elastic Stack, have a way of getting OpenTelemetry, and it's via APM. And some users do not have APM license. So sometimes you cannot use OpenTelemetry, but you can use, for example, what we call the Tyke pump, and you can actually send the data there. So pains is that, yeah. I don't know if I deviate a lot.
No, that's really interesting. So we see many of API users that love to use Elastic for logs. And when we want to give them the traces, then they can always use them because they need an additional license for traces.
Exactly.
And maybe we also see many of users that are still really relying on logs for troubleshooting, which can be very cumbersome, and that are trying to move step by step to distributed traces, but being still a journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool. So we are at the end of the session. No more questions, but thank you for the awesome discussion. Thank you, Carlos, for the demo. It was really, I think we all needed that a demo and just like seeing how things work to get a break from slides. We'll go and have 10 minutes break, and then we're going to continue with some amazing session. Stay with us, and see you in the next sessions. Thank you, Carlos.
All.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.